If you're totally new to frequency work, one of your first questions will likely be, where do I start? Whether you're brand new or you know someone who's curious about exploring frequency work, but you don't know how to help guide them, today we're answering that question. After the discussion, we get to the most important part of this episode. The group frequency calibration associated with this episode is where the frequency work happens and where change actually occurs. So be sure to listen to that. Without releasing distortion patterns targeted by the GFC, the change you want will be more difficult to attain because you haven't addressed the root of the issue. My name is Karen Cheong, and I'm here with my co-host, Tia. Let's get started.
So, Karen, Spherical Luminosity puts out a lot of content, right? There's this podcast, there's GFCs, be them group or individual. There's the Living Your Brilliance series. There's live YouTube channel things going on. There's a lot going on. And they're all great. But for someone who's new, where the heck should they start?
It can be kind of overwhelming because there's so much stuff. It's like drinking out a fire hose. So, well, I think for somebody totally brand new, the thing that you may want to know first is that there's two components to what Spherical Luminosity offers. So a lot of what I offer is the intellectual or mental understanding or frameworks to help you understand how it is that frequencies shape your world and a better understanding of the kind of like behind the curtain look of why things are the way they are. So there's the mental aspect of things, which is like things like this kind of conversation. And then the second component are, and those, I'm sorry, just to go back to the mental thing. If you have a course like Coherence Mastery, it's not just a mental framework for understanding, it's also tools to empower you so that when you are hitting bumpy patches or whatever is going on in your life, you have tools at the ready to be able to keep your frequency resonance high. Okay. And if you don't know what that means in terms of being on the higher end of your frequency bandwidth, then you may want to check out the episode called Mastering Your Frequency Bandwidth, which is within this. If you're on the YouTube live channel, you'll see it there. And if you're on listening to the podcast, you'll see it in the list of the podcasts that we've issued. So that's the first component. And the mind is important because that's how we primarily understand the world. Okay. And so a lot of times I'm speaking to your mind so that it can understand what's happening and so it can relax, so something else can happen. Now, the second component of what we offer, which is the most important component, which is actually frequency work. So frequency work is working at the frequency level to remove the distortion patterns that keep you stuck, okay, and to increase your frequency resonance. What does that mean? Okay. So most people, like you and I have discussed in different episodes. And if you're curious about the 5 most important things about frequency work, go ahead and listen to that if you're brand new, because that's a super good overview as well.
Yeah, that's true.
So in any case, frequency work addresses things at the frequency level, which is where everything originates. So I'm going to back up even further. Okay, so for some of you, this will be review, but I always feel like if you understand the basics and at some point it becomes like an aha moment, and you're like, oh, that's why things are the way they are. So in any case, everything is vibrating, okay? Now, the rate of vibration dictates what form that thing is in, right? So if you think about water vibrating, when the molecules vibrate very high, it's steam. When the molecules slow down in vibrational rate, it becomes liquid. And when it slows down even more, it becomes solid like ice. So everything is about vibrational level, everything, because everything is vibrating. And so just like water changes from steam, which is like a gas, all the way down to the density of solidity, it goes much further than that because it's way beyond the physical. So everything vibrates on the physical level all the way up through consciousness, which vibrates at a very high level. And then if you have pure source or the oneness or the divine, that vibrates at an even higher level. Now, when I speak about pure source, it's really that very, 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 very high level of consciousness from which everything derives and to which everything returns, okay? So in order to have anything that's in form, you actually need a lower level frequency of resonance than oneness, right? Because it's out there vibrating at a very, very high rate. It's not embodied. So in order to have anything but the oneness, there needs to be a drop in vibrational level, which cause, frequencies to exist. And then as that vibrational rate slows down even more, it becomes energy. And as that slows down even more, it becomes physical form or density or emotions, thoughts. Okay, so all it is, it's something that is going from very high in resonance, slowing down into things that we consider to be form. Now, everything is dictated by frequency. So if you're running around on the physical level trying to change things, it's really difficult to, because that's just the level that they show up at. But that's not the origination of the actual problem or the challenge. The challenge is a reflection of what's happening at frequency level, which is much higher in resonance. And that's created by what I call distortion pattern. So distortion is simply something that keeps us separate from the oneness or pure source or the divine or whatever you want to call it. And if we back up again, and for me, when I perceive things, we are these spheres of pure source energy that emerge from the oneness or pure source. And then we choose to have an embodied experience. So we drop into physical form. So we drop in our physical resonance and come into a physical form. As soon as that happens, there are things, what to me look like layers and layers of duct tape that form around that sphere of pure source energy. Now that pure source sphere, okay, is you. And the thing that makes it you is a very specific, unique rate of vibration. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that sphere. It's beautiful. Okay, it is actually aware that it is part of everything. But what happens is that you have layers and layers and layers and layers of this duct tape that form around the sphere. So it loses sight of the fact that pure source is everywhere in all directions around it. It loses sight of itself, and it gets very, very heavy. And so its resonance level starts to drop a little bit because it's got all this crud around it. Okay. Those layers of duct tape are metaphors for what I call distortion patterns. Okay, it's like all these layers of filters, these denser patterns that filter or give us a certain perception of reality, and it calls a certain reality to us. And that's why we have this heaviness, this density. So when I'm working on frequency level, frequency work, which is again the second component of what I do, which is the most important, is we are at the point in time where consciousness is high enough and someone like me has cleared enough of their distortions to be able to release those layers of duct tape. That's the game changer. That is where change really starts to happen, because you're changing things at the source of the problem, which is at frequency level.
And like you've said, the goal is not to remove all of the distortion patterns, just enough to get your resonance high.
Yeah.
To start feeling good.
Yeah.
Right.
Different or
shifting.
Shifting in terms of your reality, what you get to experience, the magic you have, the abundance you have, all that sort of stuff.
Right. So a lot of new people have asked me, how do you do it over the phone or through, right? And not in person. Do you want to speak to that a little?
Yeah. That's a great question. I love that question. It's because frequency work doesn't occur in the time bound. It occurs in the timeless. And you might be like, what did she just say? Okay, so to understand time, I really recommend episode 80, which is What is Time? Okay, then you'll understand what time is, because it's actually a whole half an hour discussion about what time is. So frequency work occurs beyond time, this space-time resonance. Okay, it occurs in the timeless, or what I would call the eternal now. Okay, so there's two forms of time. So this is probably a longer answer than some of you want, but when you get it, you'll be like, oh, I get it. So there's two forms of time. There's the eternal now. So everything on spirit level happens now, right now. Everything is happening in the present moment. Now, for us with brains and the idea of linear time, we're like, what? How can everything possibly be happening right now? That's not possible. That's because our brains can't compute at that level. Just imagine, like, trying to understand what that even means, like infinite things happening all at the same time. You're like, what? It's like would make your mind blow up. You just can't handle it. Exactly. Your mind can't process it because it's not a big enough computer, it's not able to compute all of that. Whereas you as a consciousness can, because you're infinite, right? You compute at a much higher level. For our minds, because we're human, we can't understand the eternal now. We can't even understand infinite. It doesn't make sense to us. So what we do is we compress time, okay? We can flatten it, just like the way that we flatten music to create an MP3, right? You have all this beautiful sound and music. And then, if you listen to something live, it's very rich. But then to send things over our phones, we compress all that data to make an MP3 so we can send it as data. And we can still hear the sound, but it's not as rich. It doesn't have all the nuances. Okay. We do the same thing with time. We compress time to make it linear, so we have past, present, future that our brains can understand. But it's a human creation. So when I'm working at the frequency level, I'm working in the eternal now, okay? Which is at the level of consciousness. And that affects the physicalness, because your physicalness is a mirror of frequency. So it doesn't matter where you're physically located because I'm working on you, not on your physical body. I'm working on you at the frequency level, which happens beyond time space in the eternal now. And that's why I can resolve past lives because I can, at the eternal now, everything is happening now. So I can access all the different timelines, all the different time space and space-time realities and alter them there at the source of the do you see what I'm saying? I'm not bound by linear time.
Right.
So that's why I don't have to be physically proximate to you to do the work. It's not required. Because
and that's why you can re-listen to things that you've done live and it's still just as powerful.
Totally. Okay. Yes, because you don't have to be physically proximate. And I'm going to throw in another thing, which also may make some people's brain go, is that the work is given at multiple levels of consciousness. So it will adjust to you. So meaning, if you've noticed this, even if you read a book, for example, like if you read a book 2 years ago and you read it now, what you get from the book is probably different because you probably are a different person.
Yeah.
It's the same with frequency work, but much more nuanced. So as you shift in your frequency resonance, if you listen to a replay of a certain whatever you're listening to, a deep dive or a GFC or whatever, then what happens is you're brought into, so it's not that the frequencies are in the recording. A lot of people think the frequencies are in the recording. They're not. The recording pulls you into the timestamp at which the frequency work was given, which brings you into that eternal now access point where the work happened. So irrespective of where you are in your consciousness or how high or you've become in terms of your frequency resonance, it's still working on you because it's given at multiple levels of consciousness. I know that's a little much for some people.
Yeah, but for some I'm sure could handle it. Others who don't quite get it, it's okay.
It's okay. Yeah. You don't need to understand it.
This is just if you want to try and understand, we're providing it.
Yeah, exactly. Totally.
But it is kind of intense. Yeah. And I'll just say the more you kind of hear, whether it's different podcast episodes or the more you hear yourself, the more we hear you speak about this, the kind of more and more familiar it starts to sound.
Exactly.
And make more sense.
Makes more sense.
Just give it some time if you're new.
Yeah. And also your frequency resonance will go up. So what you can hear and ingest right now is dependent on how high your frequency resonance. It's very bizarre, but it's true. As your frequency resonance clears from releasing distortion patterns, what you can take in terms of higher level resonating concepts or ideas changes. It's fascinating.
That's cool.
Yeah. So even though this might seem like, what is she talking about? It's okay, just be in the sound of my voice and know that on some level it's familiar to you. And it will become more so if you decide to journey with us.
And do it again.
Yeah.
Perfect. So Karen, I have another question. For people who are new and they're wanting to know where to start, right? We've given this information. What if I ask you how you started with this?
Yeah. So I totally will answer that. And what I would say is, for me, I'm a little different because I have tended to be kind of intense in my personality just before I started. So I basically, the way I tackled it was I went by topic. Okay, so for me, I was like, oh, I know what I have challenged with. So I would do any frequency work having to do with scarcity or like fear, anxiety patterns or whatever. I started there. Okay, so one of the ways that you could start is if you have something physically based that you're trying to resolve. There's a lot of free stuff available, as Tia said, right? There's this podcast. So whether you're listening to it or whether you're watching it on YouTube, if you want to start by topic, you can do that. If you want a really great roadmap for where everything is by topic, there's actually on sphericalluminosity.com under how it works, where to start. And that actually is a map by topic of different things, whether they be GFCs, deep dives, the podcast, which is free, that all is there. So if you want like a little map that might help you because you know what topic you want to address, go for that.
Great.
So I kind of did that approach. Some people, what they do is they start with trying to get a sense of who I am. Right, which is what most people do, right? So, like I said, there's tons of stuff on the YouTube channel. You can, I recommend actually going through and watching episodes 1 and 2, okay? Because a lot of people don't know how this works. And there's a bunch of free GFCs that I've given for community support during, the coronavirus or for oppression or from, there's one for people who used to be part of cults. There's a whole bunch of different free GFCs that I've given, which you can find on the products section of the website, which have been very powerful, and people have written in saying that like have saved me. So those are great things to start with. And then if you want to go deeper, then I would check out what's coming up in terms of the GFCs and deep dives. Those are by topic. and see what calls to you. Start there.
Yeah.
And see how you are with it. Yeah.
Okay.
And there is also a very important episode that we are giving called Making Some Serious Lemonade, Strengthening Through Detox. That would be a good one to watch.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to what I did as well. And
I was going to say, well, how did you start?
Yeah. So I started with the free, the GFCs at the end of the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those, it's helpful to start with something free when you don't know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
And I think it's great you offer a lot of valuable pieces of information that are free. So just because it's free doesn't mean it's like less than your paid stuff. So I want to make that clear. It's like just as great, you know? So I started with that, and I would do them. I think I started once a week, and then I ended up going to every day.
Oh, wow.
And sometimes twice a day. Because you see the change, and it's really exciting. And then I think I started doing individual sessions with you. It's all over the phone. The one-on-ones are nice because you get to specifics about, you.
Yeah.
And then from there, I would search through your deep dives and just look at topics that were interesting.
Yeah.
And then I go back and repeat things that I've done.
Yeah.
So you kind of just hop around that way.
So what's really cool about what you did is that through doing the different things that you were exploring, especially coherence mastery, it's a really, I feel like, a very helpful course because it like takes you through all the different distortions that you sort of come across and how to deal with them from an intellectual perspective, gives you tools, and then gives you very specific work on that.
Oh yeah, the tools are great.
Yeah.
And it's also something to go back and reference.
Yes.
It's not like, once you've done it, you're good. Like it's timeless, I would say.
Yeah. What I would say is the important thing about coherence mastery and some of the deep dives also are that we address certain foundational, what I call foundational distortion patterns. And you and I have done an episode called The Worst Distortions of Them All.
Yeah.
Right? So if you don't know what that is, go check them out. So a foundational distortion pattern is essentially a distortion pattern that runs through everyone if you're human. Okay, it doesn't matter what your race is, your class, how old you are, it doesn't matter. If you're human, you have these. And they run through all of us, things like, for example, fear of loss. Right? So a lot of us will hang on to things because we're afraid of losing relationships or a situation or a job or whatever. Things like fear of loss, or what I call absolute scarcity, where we feel like we have to have something else outside of ourselves to feel complete. Right? Things like this that we're not even aware of, that are huge, huge foundational distortion patterns that when you start to release those really start to change the game in terms of how you feel, because they're so entrenched in the human experience. So I would say that was a really good thing for you to do also.
Yeah, that's a great point, the foundational ones.
Yeah.
And also, like now I've been doing it for over a year, and I have a friend who also just started a little bit ago, and we both do this to where, if something comes up in our experience, we use the GFCs in any form that we just mentioned as a tool.
Yeah.
So for example, my friend's dog just passed away, who she's had for her whole life pretty much. So that's a very challenging thing to go through. So she chose to go and look up fear of loss, GFCs, and death and dying. And, she reached out and did those GFCs, and it's helped her a lot. Like she's noticed a big, as she told me, distance from the grief. She can feel the grief, right? She's a human, sees it kind of coming in and out, but it doesn't weigh her down and overwhelm her.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, it's huge.
That's really huge.
That's awesome.
So that's a place you could start too. Like if something's coming up, go to find that topic.
Yeah.
And use it as a tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's where I would say to start. So you can go by topic in the Where to Start page. You can go through the podcast, which is what a lot of people do, to find topics that work best for you. And we've given people resources. Then move into the GFCs, deep dives. A lot of people, it's funny, will jump into Living Your Brilliance because that is something that a lot of people want to feel more of. And Coherence Mastery is a wonderful also course to take you through if you want something very comprehensive. That's another thing. And so depending on how gung-ho you are, if you were someone like me, you wanted to do everything, right? That is kind of like where you would, I think the direction I would go in if I were starting again, having what I have available. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, you offer so much variety for so many different people at different places in their life. So there's definitely something for everybody.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Tia. I hope you've been enjoying this episode. If you'd like to subscribe to our channel, please go ahead and hit the red subscribe button at the bottom right of this video, and you will be notified on when I come onto YouTube Live, where I answer questions live. It's the only place that I do answer question live other than our Coherence Mastery course, which is $3,000, our Limitless Potential Mastermind, which is $5,000. So it's an opportunity for you to answer those questions. And if you subscribe and hit the little bell, then you will be notified of when I am coming on live. And if you would like to do the work, which is the most important part of this episode, then please listen to the GFC or group frequency calibration associated with this episode, which will start to give you more momentum in releasing your distortion patterns so that you can accelerate forward. We're about to start the group frequency calibration, or GFC, where we actually do the frequency work and where change is catalyzed. To get to the GFC, click on the square that'll appear to the right or the link in the description below. It's time to bring in a new experience, a new consciousness, and a new world. Let's rise together.